Hey gorgeous souls, it's Vix, and this video is a little bit tricky to make. Just as I was preparing to make it, I suddenly started feeling so nervous, and it's been a really long time since I felt nervous making a video and putting it on YouTube, so it's like, okay, something's happening. I really want to talk about a few things in this video. I don't know exactly what I'm going to say at this point, or if I'm even going to put it on YouTube. Maybe it's just for me. And sometimes these things are. If you're a creative, then you'll understand that. Sometimes we write a post or a blog post or a post on Instagram, or we make a video and then we get to the end of it and we start watching it back and we're like, this isn't for the internet. This is just maybe just for me to move through some of my stuff, and it's just part of my process. So I don't know yet whether this video is just a part of my process or whether it's something that I feel like I want to share with the world when it's finished. So basically, many of us, maybe not everybody, because not everybody is online and hanging out in all spiritual communities in the way that I am. But there was a post that came out last week by Doreen Virtue, a list of the A to Z practices, New Age practices to avoid and why. And it hit a lot of people really, really hard. And it hit me hard too. I will put my hand up and admit that. I actually had really no problem at all with Doreen's conversion, with any of her choices. I was just, you know, okay, cool, whatever. Like, she wants to go down that path, that's fine. I didn't feel like it meant that any of her previous teachings or her work was invalid. Like, I still, to this day, use some of her decks. And I held a lot of space for people who were finding that challenging. I was more than happy to do that because I absolutely completely understood why people found that hard. Absolutely. Like, you know, I got it. Just because I wasn't feeling it, I could totally see and appreciate why people were feeling the way that they were. So I held space in my group, the Spiritual Journey Pit Stop, for people to talk about that. But I personally didn't really feel upset or betrayed or anything like that. But with this post, the A to Z practices, New Age practices to avoid, I felt a little bit of a shift in my energy around the whole thing. And as much as I still absolutely respect her decision and her path and the choices that she makes for herself, I did find that post difficult to read and problematic in many ways, especially the practices that are Native American practices, which she suggested that we avoid. I found that that hit something in me that was just like, you know, it's one thing to say that, you know, Harry Potter is not okay, and it's another thing to start talking about Native practices in that way. So, you know, I spent a bit of time kind of like trying to move through this and work out what it was all about for me. And a lot of the stuff that actually it started to bring up for me was about my experiences with the church. And I think that's what I want to talk about in this video, more than anything to do with my opinion on other people's conversions or their blog posts or whatever. But what I've been seeing a lot online is, and this is through the whole thing, you know, this isn't just new, this is from when Doreen converted to now, and it feels like it's all coming up again for people. I've seen a lot of anger and I don't want to say hate, but there's like that hater feel where there's a lot of people who are kind of hating on Doreen, and you know, I personally feel like we all have to feel our feelings around this. Like, we absolutely have to feel what we feel. And we shouldn't be like judged or told that's not how you're supposed to feel about this, you should feel this way. I'm not interested in telling people how to feel, like you got to feel what you feel. But in terms of like what we then put on the internet and what we say about somebody else in a public forum, which is anywhere on the internet, even private groups is still a public forum. I feel like we need to, I feel like we, and I'm using the we as like us in the spiritual community, us light workers, starseeds, you know, whatever you want to call yourself, spiritual person, witches, whatever, I feel like we can do better than that. And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't go through the anger and the pain and the hate if that's what we're feeling. It doesn't mean we shouldn't feel all those things. But when it comes to kind of then stepping up and like talking about it, that we should really be having these discussions from a place of our own personal empowerment, but also from love and compassion, because ultimately that's what it's about. And yeah, so what I really want to talk about is my experience in the church, because when I look at what Doreen is, some of the stuff she's saying, some of the stuff that she is putting out on the internet that's making people feel all the feels, I know where she's coming from. And that may sound a little bit like, Vix, what? But I have spent time in the church. I was a born-again Christian. I was fully into it. Like I was all in. And I just want to kind of talk a little bit about what that was like for me. Again, I just want to say this is, did I say this already? I just really want to make it very, very clear from the start that this is my personal experience in the church, and everybody in the church is having a totally different experience, right? Everybody in the churches that I went to had totally different experiences. The people who were sitting next to me in church on a Sunday were having a totally different experience than I was. So this is not about all Christians or all churches or anything like that. This is just my personal experience, and it's just, there's so much about Doreen's path when I'm watching what she's sharing and going through that I feel like I know what it's like to be in that energy and to be in that place where you say things like that. And in the interest of bringing some more light and some more compassion to the situation, I wanted to share how I got to that point and what that felt like for me when I was in that energy. So this might be, I'm looking at the time already, it's like, this might be a long one, guys. So go make a tea or start doing the ironing or something while you're listening, if you're interested to listen to this. And you may have heard some of this, story before, because I have shared about my path before, like, you know, that I was witchy and then I was Christian and then I was witchy again. But I feel like I'm going to go into a little bit more detail here, and I feel like I'm probably going to share things that I haven't really shared before. So, okay. So I have been spiritual all my life, right? Like it never occurred to me a single day in my life that there was no God. I'm using God as like a word here, you know, it never occurred to me that there was no God, that there was no something else, you know, like after this. I was just always of the belief that we were here, we were having this experience, and then we'd go to the next place. Like it never occurred to me when I was young to ever question that. It was only when one of the kids in I think I was in like year 2 or year 3, maybe it was later, maybe it was year 4 or 5, I don't know, some kid in class asked the teacher, what happens when you die? And the teacher said, nothing, that's it. And I was like, that changed my whole world for a moment. I was like, what? Because it was the first time that the idea had ever come into my mind that there was nothing. It was just like completely bizarre to me that there could be nothing. And so I remember kind of having this like existential crisis at the age of like 10 years old around like, oh my goodness, like what happens when we die? Like, is it or are we going to be okay? Like what's going to happen? I moved through that. I think my my faith led me through that. And just to clarify as well, this wasn't a faith that came from a religion at all. My parents were not religious. They were open-minded and they were somewhat spiritual in the things that they believed and talked about, but I did not come from a religious family. However, I did grow up in Australia. You can probably tell from my accent. And Australia is kind of a Christian country, right? Like we know about Jesus. People talk about Jesus. People talk about God. Like we understand that that's we understand that concept, even if we're not going to church ourselves. So that was kind of, it was like this weird moment in my life. It's probably not really relevant to the story, but I figured if we're starting from the beginning. And, then I kind of let that go and I was like, that teacher doesn't know what they're talking about. Like, of course there's something out there. I used to pray a lot. I used to talk to God. I used to kind of lie in bed when I was little and like ask questions out loud and just kind of talk to this being, this energy, this thing that I don't even know if I really had a word for it at the time, but I always felt like I could communicate with something outside of myself, or perhaps it was within myself, but that was the way I was talking and communicating at the time. And so I've always felt like that was the thing that we could do as humans on this human journey, that we always had this ability to connect and communicate with the universe, God, the creator, whatever you want to call it. When I got into high school, it was about 1995 when, actually it might have been 1994, it was around then anyway, I was about 14, 15, and The Craft came out at the cinema and new age shops were popping up like all over the place in Australia. Witchcraft was becoming cool and it was kind of having this moment, this mainstream moment, and I was like, this is my thing, like this is it for me. I started collecting crystals, I started reading witchy books, like I was just getting really, really into the whole witchy woo-woo thing. And to me at that time, it felt really, it just felt really fun and awesome and like, oh, this is a way that I can connect with that thing that I've always known is out there. I was in a coven with some friends for a while, and I used to practice at home in my bedroom. I used to like put out this like cloth and I'd sit in circle and I'd do spells and everything. And I really enjoyed it, but I didn't really know what I was doing. I was sort of doing spells that I found in like magazines. And, I think I had like a couple of books, but they were very basic spell books, that were like, here's a love spell, here's this or whatever. I didn't have any sort of like training in how to use my energy. I just didn't really know what I was doing. And so I started to get a little bit freaked out because some of the things that I was doing, some of the spells that I was casting, like things would start happening, and I wasn't really prepared for that. Obviously, I was casting these spells and asking for these things to come in because I wanted them to come in, but when they did, it was like, whoa, like this is out of my comfort zone. This is out of my zone of like, these are the things that are normal and okay, and it was like these things that were outside of that. And so I had some difficulty really kind of accepting what was going on, and I just started to get a little bit freaked out. So I stopped doing witchy stuff. I still collected crystals and I still did like some divination and stuff like that for myself, but I kind of moved a bit more away from like the spell work and kind of more into just kind of like conversing with the universe like I'd always done. And crystals were like a big thing for me at that time. I was really into crystals, and I was still reading all of the witchy magazines and everything. but I just wasn't I was just a little bit like, still really into it and reading about it and everything, but I wasn't really like practicing that much because I was a little bit like creeped out by it. Anyway, a few years later, I was kind of, the New Age stuff was kind of on the back burner. I still had some books and runes, a deck of runes, a set of runes and things like that, but I wasn't really using it that much. I was wearing crystals. I think I had like a moonstone that I used to wear all the time for my intuition and things like that, but I wasn't actively practicing as a witch. Anyway, this was a few years later, like the late 90s, and I started to hang out with a new group of friends, and one of which was a guy who I started dating. And I kind of started hanging out with this group, like, more and more and more. And they were a group who went to church. They were Christians. And for a long time, they didn't really talk to me about that. We just kind of all hung out as friends, and it was really chill and cool. And I really liked them all. Like, I thought they were really cool people. And, one day actually what happened first was they started talking about church in front of me. And it wasn't like they were asking me to come, but they would just have these little conversations about like, just really random little things. Excuse me. And I remember, one of my friends, it was something really little, like somebody didn't have their watch or something, and they're like, oh, I think I left my watch. I think I left my watch at church. And, it'd be little things like that would sort of start to like, make me think like, oh yeah, they're all going to church without me. Like, oh yeah, they're always talking about church. And, eventually they asked me to come. And the first time they asked me to come, I was like, no. Like, I'm not going to church. Like, that's not my thing. Like, it's not happening. And they asked me a couple more times, and then they stopped asking me. I still hung out with them because I thought they were really cool people. And, eventually I said yes. Eventually I was like, okay, like, I'll come. Like, what do I have to lose? Like, I'll go to church once. I'll make them happy. I'll go and see what they do and where they hang out without me all the time. And then I'll, I've supported them, and then I'll, go back to doing my own thing. And what happened when I went to church is something that feels really important to this very long-winded story. When I walked into that church, I think it was like an evening service or something. When I walked in, I was on my own because my friends were all in the music group. So I walked in like basically on my own into the church. All my friends were going around like, getting ready, setting up and stuff. And I was standing there on my own, and I was just thinking like, why am I here? Like, what am I doing? This is so weird. And straight away, this group of people came up to me and they were like, hi. And I was like, hi. And they just started talking to me, and they're asking me like, my name and like, how did I know people and what was I doing at church and why did I come? And they were telling me, like, oh, come and sit here with us. Like, and it was just this feeling that like, you don't get that in most places, right? I'm getting super emotional just like thinking about it, but you don't get that in most places. Most places, when you walk in on your own somewhere, people ignore you. And that's not true of like, there are spiritual places that we'll go, we'll go to like a workshop or something and people will talk to you. But even then, when I go to a spiritual workshop or I go to a yoga class or I go to, like somewhere that's supposed to be all these spiritual people, I've never felt anything like I felt at church. Like, I will go to a yoga class, no one will talk to me. Or I've even been to like workshops or like really big spiritual events where nobody's talked to me. But when I went into church, this tiny little church, a suburban church, people came up to me straight away and they were like, wanted me to feel safe. They wanted me to feel welcome. But it didn't feel like they were doing it for any other reason than that they just wanted to be nice and they wanted me to feel like comfortable and safe. It didn't feel like there was any other reason, they weren't trying to convert me. They weren't like, oh, come with us because we're going to like convert you and you'll be a Christian forever. It didn't feel like that. And I still don't believe that was their intention. But it felt very friendly and safe and supportive. And I just felt like I had friends from the moment I walked in there. And that was interesting to me because, I wasn't expecting that. And by the end of the service, the same thing happened. Like, I was talking to people, people were getting me food. Like, I felt like I was so welcome and like I was coming home. And it felt really good. It felt really good. And from there, I kind of went home that night and I thought about a lot of things, like, obviously it was church, so they had been talking about Jesus and they were talking about all the cool stuff he did and how we should be more like him because he was great. And the music was good, like, a little bit dorky, but I loved that stuff. The music was fun. And it was really not what I was expecting. I don't know what I was expecting, but I had definitely been programmed to believe that the church was bad and that, there was just so many bad things about church and you don't want to go to church and it's all this type of people go to church and whatever. And I was really programmed to dislike the church. And so when I went and I actually had a really good time, I was like, what just happened? So that all kind of like, settled in. And then, then my friends asked me if I wanted to come back again. And I was like, yeah, okay, like, I'll come back. Went back again. Same thing happened. Everyone was really nice. And, even like the sermons were kind of cool. We were just talking about this great guy, Jesus, who really was just such a beautiful soul and such a loving individual who brought so much peace and joy and healing to people. It's like to this day I still work with Jesus because he's a cool dude. But just hearing these stories about him and everybody sitting around talking about how like, yeah, I want to be more like Jesus. Like, he was so cool. It was like, yeah, I want to be like Jesus too. He was really cool. And so, I kind of was like, this actually, this feels kind of good and right for me to be here. So I kept going to church and I took a course. I was invited to take an Alpha course. The Alpha course is, I don't know if they still run. I think they do because I occasionally see the signs up on churches as I'm passing. The Alpha course is, I think I did like a youth Alpha course at the time because I was like, I got really into it. I started going to youth group, Bible study. I went to church on Sunday mornings and hang out with my church friends all day. And then we go to this youth service on Sunday nights. That was like my life for a couple of years. And I did this Alpha course and it was really interesting. It's really great. It was basically an introduction to Christianity. And I got really into it. I really liked it. It was taught in a way, it wasn't taught in a way of like, if you don't believe in Jesus, you're going to hell. Like, that's not what they were saying. And I know they do say that in some churches, but in the place where I was, that didn't feel like the message at all. The message felt like Jesus was the way to love and truth and peace. And he was the way to living a life where you felt connected to God. And, at this time in my life, like I think I was like 17, 18 when I started going to church. So I was at this place in my life where I was pretty lost. Like, I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I had no plans to go to university at that time. Like, I had no idea what I wanted to do for a career. I was into drama and singing and dancing and stuff, but I didn't know like how I could make a career out of that at the time. So I was feeling pretty lost. So all of these messages around, you don't have to feel lost anymore. Like, this is your way, this is your path. It all just felt like, like this is exactly what I need right now. And to this day, I still believe that it was exactly what I needed then. So I kept going to church and I got more and more into it. I began singing in the ministry team and I started going to lots of the kind of bigger churches and different services and stuff all over Sydney and Canberra, where I was living at the time. And I went to Hillsong quite a few times in Sydney. I even went to a conference, like a week-long conference at Hillsong Sydney, which was just incredible. You know, like at the time when I was there and I was in this space full of all of these people, and we were all singing Jesus's, like singing his praises and worshiping Jesus in this space. It was like nothing else I've ever experienced. Like, I will say that even though I'm no longer a part of that, it was like nothing I've ever experienced. The feelings that I had when I was in these spaces, when I was worshipping Jesus with other Christians, the feelings that came over me were like nothing else I've ever experienced in my life. And that's kind of a big call, especially since I don't do it anymore. And there's reasons for that. But it really was something that, unless you've experienced it for yourself, and this is where I finally come back to my point about what Doreen's going through. Unless you've experienced these things for yourself, you can't even begin to imagine what that feels like. I have had experiences where I have felt so full of the Holy Spirit that my whole body has been convulsing, like properly convulsing, tears streaming down my face, and this incredible sense of power and peace and just like things I can't even begin to explain in words. I used to go to these churches where we would all just be like, people would be slain in the spirit, people would be falling down in the middle of church because they were so overtaken by this feeling. I had friends who spoke tongues, and I kid you not, it sounds like the real deal. When you hear people speaking tongues in church, it's like that literally sounds like another language. It's not just like somebody's just speaking gobbledygook. And an interesting little thing too, which you may or may not know, when I hear people speak light language, to me it sounds exactly the same as when my friends used to speak tongues in church. Exactly the same, like exactly the same language. That's, again, this is my experience and from what I have heard. So I can't speak for everybody, but there is something very interesting to me about that. So yeah, it was it was a really incredible time, and there were some things going on for me in my energy fields that were so intense and so like alive in me that I couldn't, like, I was finding it difficult to talk to people who weren't having those experiences, Like, I had a lot of friends in the church, and so the friends that I had in the church would understand, and we could talk about all these things. We could talk about Jesus, we could talk about God, we could talk about the weird things that happened at the service, we could talk about being slain in the spirit. I remember talking many times to my friends, saying how sad I was that I didn't have the gift of tongues when they all did. We could talk about all this stuff. Hilarious little fact, sort of a fact. When I was on a Bible camp, we were doing some praying and some healing around, like, we were trying to find out what our gifts from the Holy Spirit were. And I was like, okay, this is the day that I'm going to speak tongues. Like, this is going to happen. This is going to be my tongue speaking day. And a whole bunch of people came around me and put their hands on me, and I, opened up to the, let the Holy Spirit come down. And everybody in that group got the message that my gift was prophecy. And it's just, at the time I was like, oh, I really wanted tongues. But, I find it really interesting that, and that's what came through in that moment. And, now I read tarot for people. And of course, I don't believe that my work is really about prophecy. I feel like it's about helping people make their own choices, but it's just, it's an interesting it's an interesting little aside, little part of the story. So yeah, it was intense. There was a lot of stuff happening, and I felt in my whole being and in my whole heart that this was the path to love and light and Jesus and God, and that nothing else I'd ever experienced had come close to this. Like, nothing had come close to these feelings. And for me, it was just like, this is it, 100%, this is it. And so when people who were not in the church tried to talk to me about it, I got pretty into, I don't think I really tried to convert that many people, but I definitely, there were some times when I did try to evangelize people to come into the church, and it was, from my perspective, and I'm not saying any of this is right, by the way, I'm just telling you what it was like for me to be in that energy and be in that place. From my perspective, when I was trying to evangelize people and get them to come to church, it was because I was having such a powerful, beautiful, incredible experience that I wanted everyone to feel that too. And that's where I believe a lot of the evangelizing stuff comes from. Again, I can't speak for everybody, but for me, it was really coming from that place of like, I am feeling something that is so amazing. I want you to feel it too. And I'm sure I pissed off a lot of people in the process, but that was where it was coming from. Whether that was, wrong or right to do that, that for me, being in that place, it was all about love. For me, in that energy, from where I was at that time in my life, it was all about love, and it was all about how I was feeling more loved, more whole, more connected to God than I'd ever felt in my life, and it was freaking incredible. And I wanted everybody to feel that too. And so there's this other thing that happens too when you're in the church, when you're having these experiences, and you start to feel like the people in your life who aren't in the church, they can't understand you. And sometimes what happens is you get into arguments with your family, you get into arguments with your friends, you freak out your friends who, I had a friend, I tried to bring her to church, and she was just like, she tried to run out of church. Like, it was just, some weird things were happening at that time in my life. But, there's this feeling when you're in the church that the church is your family, and that your Christian friends are your family, and that the people who are experiencing this with you, they are the people who are going to heaven with you. They are the people they are your spiritual family. And when you then go home after having these like amazing experiences in church, you then go home, or you go, back to where you live or whatever, and people are, they're not supportive. They're not supportive of what you've been doing. It's difficult and it's complex, and you do begin to feel like your human family and your human life even is not really a real life. That the time when you're in church, that is like the real stuff, and these are the people who really get you, and this is your spiritual home and your spiritual family, and everything else starts to feel like your human life and your human family and your human friends. And the more caught up you get in being a part of the church, the more you can begin to see everybody else as kind of like, not that they're not as important, but they don't understand you. They don't understand you. They don't get you. And, a lot of people at that point start to distance themselves from family members, friends, etc. And it's not because you don't still love those people. It's just because you feel like they don't understand you, and they could never understand you in the way that your church family can understand you. And again, I'm not saying any of this is right, but I just want to share this story as a way for us to kind of think about like what Doreen's feeling and where she's at on her path. Because I really feel like what we're seeing right now is not really who she is. It's something else, you know. It's just that she's where I was. She's where I was. She's having these experiences that I had. And she, you know, you can't, like, honestly, you can't put it into words. You can't describe what it feels like. You really can't. It's just like, you know, I don't know. I was talking to my fiance last night about it, and you know, I was telling him how when I used to go to church services, how I would, you know, put my hands up like this, and I would, like, my whole body would start convulsing, and I'd start crying, and like people would be falling over, and you'd just be like so overtaken by it. And I said to him, you know, like, I don't know what it was. Like, I don't know if I was caught up in the hysteria of it, and if it was like some sort of kind of group hysteria that I was just getting caught up in. It didn't feel like that. It didn't feel like it at the time. Maybe, you know, maybe that was what it was, but it certainly didn't feel like that at the time. It felt very real and very powerful and very, very from God. So yeah, I was all in, you know, I was all in, and I was ready to go to Bible school. I was ready to give my whole life to Jesus. And, you know, when I get into something, I get into it. You know, I get into tarot reading and I make a career out of it. I get into writing stories and I publish my own novel. I'm somebody who, you know, when I'm in, I'm all in. I'm all in. And I was all in for Jesus, and I was all in for the church. And yeah, I was ready to give my whole life to the church. And that was kind of, you know, that was my big plan for a little while. It didn't work out. It didn't work out. I eventually did leave the church, and you know, one thing I really want to get across clearly is that when you are in that space, you're not thinking in the same way that you think when you're outside of that space. And some people will call this brainwashing, which I feel like the word brainwashing doesn't really describe it perfectly, because we tend to use the word brainwashing for people who are like, you're so stupid you got brainwashed. But I like to think of myself as a fairly intelligent person. And I got brainwashed. And it wasn't like there was any specific person telling me, like, you have to do these things, and like I was becoming some kind of like Christian robot. It wasn't like that. It wasn't even like people were, you know, it wasn't even like people were telling me what I had to believe in or what I was supposed to be doing with my life. When I look back, it's like, well, there was the, you know, like the person giving the sermon. There were my friends, and they weren't like, you know, I sit around with my friends sometimes and even just say, like, is this real? Like, what's going on? And we'd have these great discussions about everything. So it wasn't like there was, you know, it didn't feel like it was propaganda in that way of like, these are the things you have to do if you want to come to church, and like, you know, we're like subliminally messaging you or whatever. And maybe they are, maybe that's how it works, I don't know. But as somebody who's been in that energy, it doesn't feel like you're being brainwashed at all. It feels like you are 100% making those conscious choices. You are 100% choosing to be there on a Sunday. You're 100% choosing to give your life to Jesus. And nobody else is forcing you to do that. It's like you want to. Like, you really want to. It's like you want to be doing these things. Nobody's like forcing you to do things. You want to. And I think that's the thing that we forget, I think, when we talk about like brainwashing. People aren't it's not like people are getting like this big, you know, spirally eyes or whatever, like coming on behind the sermon, like you will believe everything I say. Like I still question stuff. I still question the Bible. I still questioned like, not totally sure I agree with that, the way that that was interpreted. I still questioned things and I still thought with my own mind, but there was like something else going on. And yeah, I just, you know, I really want to just kind of try to explain that clearly. It's like when I look back now, I can see that I was caught up in something, and that I can see that I was caught up in it, but when I was in it, I 100% believed that I was in my own power and that I could make my own choices and that I was free to come or go and free to do whatever I wanted. But, you know, the thing is, all your friends go to church, right? Like you make all these friends and you make these connections with people, and the church feels like your family. So you want to go and spend time with them. You wouldn't think about not seeing your family, you know. It's like, oh, we all go out for lunch on a Sunday. You wouldn't think about not turning up. So, you know, you want to be there. It's all in you. It's like you want to go. You want to be there. You want to experience it. It's 100% your choice. You feel like it's 100% your choice, but you never feel like you're brainwashed when you are brainwashed. But again, I don't really like the word brainwashed because I don't feel like that describes it very well. But it was something, you know, it was something. It was some kind of thing. It was some kind of thing that I was very into it. I was very like all in. So how did I get out of the church? You know, it's a really dumb story, but maybe it's not dumb, but it's you know, it's not. It is kind of a dumb story. So the Christian boyfriend that I had, he broke up with me. And of course I was devastated. I was like 18 years old. I had found the church. I'd found God. I'd found Jesus. I'd found this boy who, you know, I thought we were going to get married and be like, you know, I thought that this was like my Christian, you know, we're going to get married and we're going to like be this Christian couple and we're going to do all these Christian things and, you know, all the things that Christian couples are supposed to do and whatever. But he broke up with me and I took it really hard. You know, I was like 18 and it was hard. It was really hard. And I didn't want to go and see him at church. I didn't want to go. I didn't want to see him. I just didn't want to go. I went a couple of times and it was really hard in my heart. Like it was just really painful to go and see him, even though we'd broken up and we were sort of trying to be friends at church. And it was just like, this isn't really working for me. So I kind of started going less. And when I stopped going all of the time, I kind of started to come back to myself, and eventually I stopped going for a few reasons. You know, it wasn't just because I got dumped, although that was sort of like the catalyst. There were other things going on too, and it was almost like when we broke up, I kind of started to be more aware of the other things that had been going on too, you know. So I had, you know, I'd always sort of struggled with everybody sitting in church on Sunday morning and talking about love and peace and how we should all love each other, and then going out for lunch and everybody would sit around bitching about, you know, oh, what did so-and-so wear to church today? And oh, I can't believe this person did this and this other thing. And that to me always felt a little bit out of alignment, because my whole thing about being in church was like, I want to be more like Jesus. But then I started to see that actually that wasn't like, it didn't feel like everybody was kind of trying that hard. Like people were sort of saying that they were, and then it was like, okay, this doesn't totally feel like we're doing that now though, like what's happened. So I found that a challenge. But also, you know, the part of Christianity that's never really, well, two parts Christianity that never really felt right to me. And that is that if you don't believe in Jesus and you're not a Christian, then you're going to hell. I could never really get behind that. Even in the moments where I was like totally caught up in what was going on in the church, like I always felt in my heart that that wasn't true. And yeah, and the other thing, that Christianity is the only way to God. I never fully got behind that in my heart either. I always felt like it was one really beautiful way to get there. And I still believe that it's one really beautiful way to get there. But yeah, I couldn't get behind those things, and I couldn't go to church and keep kind of pretending that I was like ticking all the boxes, you know, like this is what we believe in this church, and here's your little like checkbox, and we believe in this and we believe in that. And you know, I sometimes, even now, like I still look on church websites to kind of think about going back, and then, you know, I see the list of things that basically, if you got to believe in this if you want to join us, and it's like, no, I can't, like I don't, and I can't. So yeah, so, you know, I distanced myself from the church. I got away. I went clubbing a lot. And then I went traveling, met so many different people. I found my soul family in so many different places, in so many different ways over the years. And being a traveler, I found many people, many soul family all over the world, all dotted all over the world. And it's a shame that we can't all hang out every Sunday together, but you know, that's just not the way it is for me at this time in my life. And yeah, you know, I kind of left the church and I started to kind of go back to my woo-woo roots, and kind of ended up here, you know, long story long. So yeah, I don't know like how useful this is to people. I don't think it's ever okay to spread fear and hate of what's different. I don't ever feel like it's okay to call out another person's beliefs, their belief system, the practices that they do, and say this is going to send you to hell. Like, I just don't really believe that's okay. But I don't think that list should have been published. It's my personal opinion, and I don't say that from a place of any judgment towards Doreen. There's a lot of people out there who are really lost. I know, because I used to be one of them. I know what it feels like to be lost, and I know what it feels like to feel like you're found. And it can be a really beautiful thing. And I, you know, absolutely believe that it is a beautiful thing for many people who find the church. Like, I don't hate on the church. I hate on some of the things that they have done or that they do, but I don't hate on all churches or all Christians at all. No way. Like, there are some amazing things. I've seen them. I've seen the love and the incredible things that are happening in churches. You know, there's some really beautiful, amazing things going on, and people doing beautiful, amazing work. But when it starts getting, you know, I feel like as leaders, as spiritual leaders, and that is, even though I have tried very hard I've tried very hard to not accept this for myself, but I am a leader in the community, and it's only because people, you know, it's only because I have a lot of followers on Instagram and I make YouTube videos. It's not because I know more than anybody else, you know, it's not because I'm better than anybody else or I know more about spirituality than anybody else. It's got nothing to do with that. It's just that, you know, I started an Instagram account and I did it consistently, and I shared messages from cards and things that come up for me in my meditations, and people resonate with them. That's the only reason that that I'm a leader, that I have this, this people that will listen to me, is because I've been talking this whole time. It's not because I know everything. It's not because I just want to make that really clear. I don't feel like that's at all where any of this comes from for me. But I feel like now that I have this, now that I'm in this position, I feel very strongly that I need to be mindful about what I share and what I say and how I do that, because there are so many people out there who are lost, who are looking for advice, who are looking for a way to God and a way back to themselves. And if we are going to be the people who say, I know a way, come and chat with me, I know a way that you can do that, we need to do that in a way that is loving and that allows that person to always stand in their own power. And I try to do that all the time with my work, whether it's courses or readings or sessions or in the circle. It's like I'm not the person that can tell you the answers. I'm just here to create some content that can make you think about stuff. And I just, I just feel really, really strongly that it is our job to help people find their way back to themselves. I do feel like that's part of my job, but it's certainly not through fear or through misinformation. It's always got to be from a place of love and holding space for people and letting people find their own way. And so whether you're watching this as a New Ager or a Christian or whatever your path is, your path is your path, and your path is the right path for you if it's working for you. And for me, at that time when I was pretty hardcore Christian, that was the path that I needed to be on. And when I was 17, 18, and I was pretty lost. I was pretty naive. And I was looking for answers. And I didn't, the church provided answers for me for a while, and it provided this beautiful, safe place where I could explore some of the stuff that I needed to explore. And you are more than welcome to disagree with me on this next thing that I wanted to say. But I feel like Doreen is having an experience that her soul wants to experience and that she needs to experience for whatever reasons, I don't know. But she needs to experience this, and that's okay. It's not okay to it's not okay to tell people what to do. It's not okay to spread hate and fear. I don't think that's okay at all. But I think in terms of the path that she's on with Christianity and with the church, her soul wants to have this experience, and my soul wanted to have that experience, and I'm glad for it. I'm so glad I had that experience. And I know that there are lots of people out there probably watching this as well who've had really hurtful, traumatic experiences in the church, and my heart goes out to you. And I'm just, it breaks my heart that that happens to people. It completely breaks me to think that people are going into these places where it's like, I feel welcome and this is my home, and then these things happen. Like, that's just absolutely appalling that that's going on this planet. But all I can do is share my own experiences. And the truth is that not everybody who goes to church is an abuser or has been abused. There's a lot of people who are in church who are actually loving it, and it's bringing them peace and joy and connection with God and the divine. And from the outside, it can look like something else is going on, but from the inside, that's how it feels. And, even looking back on it now, it still felt like that's what I needed to do. That's how I needed to experience God and my spiritual path in that time. And, it turned out that it wasn't the way for me full time. It's like that was just a couple of years of my life where I needed to experience that. And it's my prayer that if Doreen comes back to us, that we welcome her. I did so well not to get super emotional in this video. Because there's just like, there are so many people out there who are just sending her so much hate right now, and that's not what she needs. None of us need that. And we can disagree 100% with a blog post. We can 100% disagree with that, and we can talk about why it's problematic and why it's not okay to share that stuff and what we need to be doing as leaders and teachers in this world. We can talk about that and we can say this isn't okay. But in terms of who she is as a person and like just the path that she's on, like we need to, I personally feel like we need to come at this from a place of compassion and love, because a lot of the things that I've seen, the way that we're treating her, like she's not going to come back. Like, she's not going to come back. She's not going to come back to New Age or a different path. Like, you know, if she did leave the church, this is what I want. You know, if she did leave the church, where would her safe place be? And I was lucky because I didn't totally piss off all my friends. Like, I had some friends, but I was lonely. You know, when I left the church, I was lonely for a while because for a couple of years, like everybody that I talked to, everybody that I, you know, that was close to me was in the church. So when I left, I lost so many friends and so many connections with people. So, you know, that's something that I think about, is like, if she comes back, who will welcome her? I will. And some people, I know some people out there who have been, you've been so hurt and traumatized by this whole thing, and you won't be able to. And I understand that too. You know, I totally get that too. I'm not saying we all have to be standing there with open arms, but yeah, I just feel like we talk about love and we talk about working on ourselves and we talk about bettering ourselves and connecting to God and oneness and all of these things, and then, you know, and then someone pisses us off and we're like, we're all over the internet just sharing, you know, about how much we hate this person or whatever. And again, you know, we've got to feel our feelings, but we do have to consider what the forum for that is. The forum for feeling your feelings is often not going straight to your posts on Instagram, but maybe it's, you know, DMing a friend or getting on your knees at the altar, just having a big cry, or hitting a pillow. I don't know. These are just my thoughts and my opinions, and yeah, it's when you're in the church, it's hard to understand that unless you've experienced it. And again, not everybody who's in the church has experienced it in the way I did. But I feel like the way that I experienced it is very similar to the way that Doreen's experiencing it right now. And so I just thought if I shared my story a little bit, it might help us to come to this from a place of a bit more understanding about what's going on, rather than judgment and fear and anger and all of those things, which are okay to feel as well. But, you know, I think understanding is something that we could feel as well. I don't know, it's always just my thoughts. You can agree or disagree or whatever. If you have questions about this, and some of you might, if you have more questions about what it was like for me in the church, because I'm kind of thinking now there's some pretty important things that I didn't cover, but maybe I wasn't supposed to in this video, and that's okay. But if you have questions about what it was like in the church, if you have any other questions you want to ask me about it, like, please ask me in the comments, like, or come on to Spiritual Journey Pit Stop group and we can talk about anything. I'm more than happy to talk about it. and answer any questions that you have about my weird path into, you know, being a born again Christian and then coming out as a professional tarot reader. It's, you know, it's not normal. It's not that normal, although it is kind of normal because a lot of people have had experiences in the church and then gone to New Age, or the other way around as well. But yeah, if you want to chat, I'm totally open to having conversations about this, and I will leave it there. And I hope that this has been useful for somebody out there. And you know, whether you're a Christian or a New Ager, or you identify as something completely different, it's all good. Okay, sending you so much love and light.